May the Lord's peace embrace you, His light strengthen your steps, and His love never leave your heart. Welcome to God's hidden plan, where each story from the Bible is more than history, it is a living message for you today. A whisper before the dawn. Have you ever heard the name Lilith? It is not a name shouted from pulpits or taught in Sunday school classrooms. It is a whisper, a rustle in the dry pages of forgotten lore, a shadow that flits at the very edge of recorded sacred history. On a night like this, under a canopy of stars so sharp and cold they seem like chips of ice in an infinite blackness, one can almost feel the weight of such ancient secrets. Imagine an ancient scroll, its parchment, the color of aged bone, laid out under an eerie, otherworldly glow. As our eyes trace the cryptic, faded lettering, a deep and engaging voice seems to rise not from the air, but from the very silence itself, posing a question that has haunted the curious for millennia. The voice asks, who was Lilith? Some claim she was the first woman, the first wife of Adam, a predecessor to the more familiar Eve. Was she a queen who refused to be subjugated? A demoness born of pride and defiance? Or was she something else entirely? A truth so inconvenient that it had to be buried beneath layers of interpretation and time. For centuries, this enigmatic figure has been a ghost in the theological machine, a puzzle piece that doesn't seem to fit. Her story, fragmented and controversial, challenges the very foundation of what we believe about the dawn of humanity. It forces us to ask an almost forbidden question. If there was a woman before Eve, why was she erased? And what does her story reveal about the nature of God, creation, and rebellion? Prepare yourself, for we are about to embark on a journey. We will not walk the well-trodden paths of conventional teaching, but will instead venture into the dim, dusty archives of history and myth. We will peel back the delicate layers of sacred text, apocryphal writings, and whispered legends to uncover the dark and fascinating truth about Lilith. We will sift through the sands of time, examining the fragments left behind a single mention in scripture, a detailed account in a controversial medieval text, echoes in the mythology of civilizations long dead. Was she a misunderstood hero of female independence, a symbol of righteous rebellion against unjust authority? Or was she a far more sinister entity, a cautionary tale of pride that leads to eternal desolation? This exploration will take us to the very beginning, to a world before the Garden of Eden as we know it, before the serpent whispered its temptation, and before the monumental fall that would forever alter the course of human destiny. There was another story, a whisper that preceded the narrative we all know. It's a story of a choice that rippled through creation, setting in motion events that would shape heaven and earth. So, stay with me on this journey into the shadows of the past. Let us unravel this ancient mystery together, and in doing so, perhaps we will learn more not just about Lilith, but about ourselves. Before we begin, consider the Eden we know, the paradise of perfection. For it is only by understanding the light that we can truly appreciate the depth of the shadow that was cast. The Garden of First Light. Let us set the stage. To understand the rupture, we must first appreciate the perfection that was ruptured. In the beginning, before time was measured by the anxieties of mortals, the world was a divine masterpiece. Picture it not as a mere location, but as a living, breathing canvas painted with the very breath of God. According to the foundational verses of the book of Genesis, God sculpted Adam, the first man, from the humble dust of the earth. It was not a violent or chaotic creation, but an act of intimate artistry. He gathered the soil, shaped it with intention and love, and then, in a moment so sacred and pure that the very air must have shimmered with holiness, he breathed his own life into the lifeless form. In that instant, Adam became a living soul. Imagine the first moments of his consciousness, the first sight of a world bathed in a soft, golden light, a paradise where every color was more vibrant, every sound more harmonious than anything we could possibly comprehend. This was Eden. It was a symphony of life, where birds sang melodies composed by the Creator, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blossoms that never faded. Rivers of crystal clear water flowed without cease, nourishing a land where every tree bore perfect fruit, and harmony was the natural law governing all existence. Adam's purpose was divine in its simplicity and profound in its scope. To tend this magnificent garden, to be its steward, to walk in perfect, unbroken communion with his Creator. We see him in our mind's eye, walking through the lush greenery, his face filled with awe and wonder as he fulfills his first great task, naming the creatures of the world, giving language to the beauty that surrounds him. But here, in this portrait of absolute perfection, the narrative introduces a subtle, yet crucial, element of incompleteness. Genesis tells us that after the great parade of creation had passed before Adam, after every beast of the field and bird of the air had received its name, God observed him and declared, "It is not good for the man to be alone." This solitude was the single imperfection in a perfect world. And so, the divine artist acted again, causing a deep sleep to fall upon Adam. God took one of his ribs and, from it, fashioned a companion, a partner, an equal. This was Eve, the mother of all living. This is the story etched into the consciousness of billions, the bedrock of Judeo-Christian theology, a perfect beginning, a divine partnership, a world untouched by sin, a man and a woman created for each other. This is the tale we all know. It is a story of beautiful, simple symmetry. Adam from dust, Eve from his side. But what if that symmetry is too simple? What if it is an edited version of a more complex, more turbulent first draft? What if, before Eve was formed from Adam's rib, there was another figure, a woman whose name has been deliberately obscured, whose story has been buried so deep in the sands of time that only whispers remain? Before we unearth her, let us linger for a moment longer in this pristine Eden. Place yourself in Adam's position, standing in a world where every need is met, where the divine presence is as close and as tangible as your own breath. Feel the perfect peace, but listen closely. Beneath the bird song and the rustling leaves, a different sound is coming. A shift, a ripple in the tranquil waters of paradise is about to appear, and its source is a will as strong and as primordial as Adam's own. The shattering of harmony. Now, let us speak her name, Lilith. This name does not grace the pristine pages of Genesis, but it echoes with ferocious persistence through the corridors of ancient Jewish texts, in apocryphal writings that were deemed too strange or too challenging for the canon, and in whispered legends passed down through generations of mystics and scholars. The most prominent of these legends tells a story that begins not with a rib, but with the same handful of dust. According to this tradition, Lilith was Adam's first wife, created by God not from Adam's side, but from the very same earth, at the very same time. She was his equal in origin, his twin in creation. And in this equality, the seeds of conflict were sown. The sky over Eden, once a canvas of perpetual gold and blue, begins to loom with stormy clouds as we contemplate this alternate Genesis. The camera of our mind focuses on a shadowy, enigmatic figure. Her form is indistinct, cloaked in the mystery of suppressed history, but her presence is undeniable. This is Lilith, and here, the story takes its dark, decisive turn. Lilith was not content to exist as Adam's subordinate. The traditions, most notably the medieval text known as the Alphabet of Ben Sira, paint a vivid picture of a fundamental disagreement. It was not about grand theological doctrines or cosmic betrayals. It began with a dispute over posture, over position, over power. Adam, seeing himself as the primary creation, insisted on his superiority. Lilith, knowing she was fashioned from the same earth, refused to accept a subservient role. She demanded equality in all things, refusing to lie beneath him, refusing to bow to his authority. Her defiance, her pride, her unyielding spirit, they were a direct challenge to the patriarchal order Adam assumed was divinely ordained. Imagine the scene, a tense confrontation between the first man and the first woman, their silhouettes stark and unbending against a fiery, turbulent sunset. His plea for submission meets her unshakable demand for respect. Why did Lilith rebel? Some interpretations suggest she was driven by a fierce, almost modern, desire for independence, a refusal to accept a role she believed was beneath her dignity and her origin. In this light, she is a proto-feminist icon, a hero of self-determination. Other, more critical traditions paint her as a creature consumed by a fatal pride, an arrogance so profound that she was unwilling to submit not just to Adam, but to the divine design itself. Whatever her motives be, they noble or narcissistic, her actions were the spark that ignited the powder keg of paradise. The conflict reached its breaking point. In a moment of ultimate defiance, cornered and refusing to yield, Lilith did the unthinkable. She spoke a forbidden word, a sacred utterance not meant for mortal tongues, the ineffable name of God. In that instant, the power of the name granted her freedom. The air in Eden grew heavy and cold. The divine light seemed to dim, recoiling from the blasphemy. And with newly acquired wings, Lilith fled the garden, leaving behind a bewildered and wounded Adam, a fractured paradise, and a divine plan thrown into disarray. Her figure vanished into the shadowy, untamed wilderness that lay beyond the borders of Eden. This was no small act of petulance. Lilith's rebellion was not merely a personal choice. It was a cosmic rupture, a challenge to the very structure of creation. And yet, even in this moment of flight, the story was not over. Some legends say that heaven itself hesitated, that a chance for redemption was offered. But the choice had been made, and its consequences would be irreversible, casting a long, dark shadow across the whole of human history. The judgment in the wilderness. The immediate aftermath of Lilith's flight was swift and profound. The perfect, unbroken harmony of Eden was fractured. The silence she left behind was not peaceful, but heavy and resonant with loss. Adam, now truly alone, walked through the perfect garden, but the perfection felt hollow. He felt the sharp, aching weight of her absence, the void left by his equal. The world itself seemed to mourn. The light was a little less golden, the songs of the birds a little more plaintive, as if the very fabric of creation grieved the loss of its original, symmetrical design. But in the heavens, grief was mingled with justice. God, in his infinite wisdom and power, did not let Lilith's act of supreme defiance go unanswered. The order of creation had been challenged, and it had to be restored. The most detailed account of this celestial response comes to us from the alphabet of Ben Sira. According to this ancient text, God dispatched 3 of his holy angels to pursue Lilith and persuade her to return. Their names were Sinoi, Sansanoi, and Samanjaloth. Visualize them, beings of light and power, streaking across the firmament, leaving the pristine beauty of Eden for the desolate, untamed wilderness where Lilith had taken refuge. They found her by the shores of the Red Sea, a place that would later become synonymous with deliverance and judgment. The angels, their faces stern, but their voices carrying a tone of pleading, delivered the divine ultimatum. Return to Adam, submit to the divine order, and be restored to your place in paradise. If she refused, a terrible judgment would befall her. 100 of her demonic offspring would die each day for eternity. Here, in this desolate landscape, far from the gentle streams of Eden, Lilith's character was irrevocably forged. She stood before the celestial messengers, unyielding. The prospect of returning to a life of submission was more terrifying to her than any divine punishment. She refused to repent. She chose exile over submission, darkness over a light that required her to diminish herself. Her heart had hardened, her path was set, and so, the divine judgment was enacted. Lilith was cast out, not just from the geographical confines of Eden, but from the state of grace she once knew. She was to be forever separated from the divine presence that had breathed life into her. Her name would no longer be that of the first woman, but would become a whisper on the wind, a name invoked to frighten children, a warning against pride, a shadow in the grand story of humanity. Her form began to change, her essence twisting to align with her new reality. She became something more ethereal, more dangerous, her beauty taking on a predatory, almost demonic edge as she fully embraced her new path of exile and darkness. But here, the story offers a surprising and complex twist. Even in this moment of judgment, there was a strange form of mercy. In some versions of the legend, God, or perhaps the angels acting on his behalf, placed a protective mark or seal upon Lilith. It was an oath sworn between them. The angels would not harm her, and in return, she would not harm any human infant who was protected by an amulet bearing the names of Sinoi, Sansanoi, and Samanjaloth. Why this strange pact? Perhaps it was a final, lingering echo of divine grace, a testament that even in the darkest moments of rebellion, God's sovereignty includes preservation as well as punishment. Yet this covenant did not alter her destiny. Lilith's choice led her into a new realm, a kingdom of shadows, an existence defined by the night. She became a figure of myth, the mother of demons, a specter of the dark, and, as some of the most ominous whispers would later claim, the chosen bride of Samael, the angel of death, Satan himself, the echo in the silence. But here is where the story transforms from a simple legend into a profound and perplexing mystery. If Lilith was indeed Adam's first wife, if her rebellion was such a cosmically significant event that it fractured the harmony of creation and required the intervention of angels, then why is she almost completely absent from the primary source text, the Bible itself? The book of Genesis, our foundational account of creation, the fall, and the dawn of humanity, speaks in great detail of Adam and Eve. It describes their creation, their life in the garden, their temptation, and their exile. It establishes them as the progenitors of all mankind. But of Lilith, there is not a single, unambiguous word. Her name, her story, her very existence, they are nowhere to be found in the narrative of the beginning. This silence is deafening. It is an omission so total that it begs the question, was she deliberately erased? Did later editors of the sacred texts remove her story because it was too problematic, too challenging to the patriarchal structures they sought to reinforce? Or was she never there to begin with? The search for Lilith in the canonical scriptures leads to one, and only one, possible reference. It is a fleeting, cryptic mention in the book of Isaiah, chapter 34. The prophet is describing the utter desolation that will befall the land of Edom as a result of God's judgment. He paints a picture of a wasteland, a place of thorns and nettles, inhabited only by wild beasts and creatures of the night. And in verse 14, he says, "The wild beasts of the desert shall also meet with the wild beasts of the island, and the satyr shall cry to his fellow. The screech owl also shall rest there, and find for herself a place of rest." That term, screech owl, is a translation of the original Hebrew word, Lilith. Here she is, a single word, a whisper in a prophecy of ruin. But what does it mean? Was Isaiah referring to the literal first woman, now a cursed immortal haunting the desolate places of the earth? Or was he using a term from common folklore, referring to a well-known mythological night demon, a night creature used to personify the complete and terrifying emptiness of the cursed land? This single mention raises far more questions than it answers. It is a tantalizing clue, a breadcrumb dropped in the vast wilderness of the Old Testament. The silence of the rest of the scriptures is not empty. It is charged with possibility. That one fleeting reference to a Lilith became a seed. For ancient Jewish mystics, particularly the Kabbalists, who authored the profound and esoteric text known as the Zohar, this was enough. They could not ignore the echo. They saw Lilith not just as a night demon, but as a cosmic force, a metaphysical reality. She became the archetypal other, the dark feminine principle, a chaotic counterpoint to the life-giving obedience of Eve and the divine order of the Shekinah, the feminine presence of God. But what if her story, whether it began as history or myth, holds a deeper truth, a truth about the untamed aspects of humanity, about the nature of rebellion, and about the terrible, lonely cost of defying the divine? The silence of the Bible on Lilith is not an end to the story. It is the very thing that makes the mystery so compelling. Threads of myth and legend. So, who or what was Lilith? Faced with the resounding silence of Genesis and the single, ambiguous clue in Isaiah, we must cast our net wider, exploring the tapestry of theories and interpretations that have been woven around her name for centuries. Let us sit at a virtual round table with the scholars, mystics, and historians of ages past, their animated voices overlapping as they debate her true identity. One of the most compelling and historically grounded theories suggests that Lilith is not originally a figure from Hebrew lore at all, but rather a remnant, a borrowing from the much older mythologies of ancient Mesopotamia. This theory posits that the figure of Lilith evolved from a class of demonesses known in Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian texts as the Lilitu. These were wind spirits or night demons, often depicted as winged, seductive, and dangerous figures who haunted the night, preying on men in their sleep and threatening women in childbirth and their newborn infants. Clay tablets dating back to as early as 2400 BC from ancient Sumer mention these spirits of chaos and uncontrolled sexuality. When the Jewish scribes and prophets were formulating their own cosmology and writing the text that would become the Hebrew Bible, they were living in a world saturated with these Mesopotamian stories. It is highly plausible that they absorbed this figure of the Lilitu into their own folklore, transforming her into a symbol, a cautionary tale against the dark forces that threatened the stability of family and faith. The mention of Lilith in Isaiah 34, placed among other desert creatures and demonic figures like satyrs, fits perfectly into this context. She is simply one of the many terrors that inhabit a land abandoned by God. But here is the catch. The counter-argument that keeps the debate alive. This theory, compelling as it is, relies entirely on outside sources and cultural borrowing. It explains the word Lilith, but doesn't fully account for the rich, detailed narrative of her as Adam's first wife. That specific story, the one with the confrontation in Eden and the flight to the Red Sea, comes from much, much later texts. The primary source for this narrative, the alphabet of Ben Sira, was not written until the early Middle Ages, somewhere between the 8th and 10th centuries AD, more than 1,000 years after the Torah was compiled. This leads many critical scholars to argue that the story of Lilith as the first wife is not a recovered ancient truth but a medieval invention. They see it as a piece of satirical, even folkloric, Jewish literature created to explore themes of marital strife, female autonomy, and the nature of demons. but never intended to be read as a literal prequel to Genesis. A third path opens between these two theories, that Lilith is neither a historical person nor a borrowed demon, but a purely symbolic figure. In this view, she represents the dangers of unchecked pride, the chaos that erupts when the created being refuses to accept the Creator's order. She is the embodiment of the untamed wilderness that stands in opposition to the cultivated garden. She is the sterile night in contrast to Eve, the fertile mother of all living. Her story is a parable, a personification of a philosophical or theological concept. It's a way to talk about the parts of ourselves and our world that are rebellious, wild, and resistant to divine harmony. These threads, the Mesopotamian demon, the medieval invention, the symbolic archetype, are all tangled together, creating the complex and multifaceted figure we know today. The Bible's silence doesn't provide a definitive answer, but perhaps its purpose was never to give us a biography of a demon. Perhaps the focus was always meant to be elsewhere, on God's clear and unfolding covenant with humanity through the line of Adam and Eve, leaving figures like Lilith to the shadows where myths and warnings dwell. The weight of the canon. So, after sifting through ancient myths, medieval folklore, and symbolic interpretations, what is the most accepted explanation for the figure of Lilith, particularly among mainstream biblical scholars and theologians? When we move from the speculative and esoteric to the world of textual criticism and canonical theology, the picture becomes much clearer, though perhaps less dramatic. We find ourselves in a quiet, serene study, the air filled with the scent of old paper and leather. A scholar is carefully reading the opening chapters of Genesis, not searching for what is hidden, but understanding what is plainly stated. The broad consensus among biblical scholars is that Lilith is not a literal, historical figure in the Genesis account of creation. The idea of her as Adam's first wife, while a powerful and enduring legend, is understood to originate not in scripture, but in later Jewish mysticism and folklore. The foundational texts of the Judeo-Christian faith are unequivocal in their presentation. The creation story in Genesis focuses intently on a specific theological message: God's sovereign creation of the world, and humanity's special place within it. The narrative builds methodically. Adam is created, the animals are created, and then, to solve the problem of Adam's solitude, Eve is explicitly and uniquely created from his side to be his Ezer Kenegdo, a helper corresponding to him, a partner perfectly suited for him. The narrative structure leaves no room and provides no textual evidence for a preceding wife. The Bible's account is clear and purposeful. God created humanity in his image, male and female. He created them, and the story immediately flows into the partnership of Adam and Eve as the primordial human pair. The fleeting, single reference to Lilith in Isaiah 34-14 is almost universally interpreted by these scholars in its most likely literary and cultural context. In ancient Israel, the world was perceived to be full of unseen forces, spirits, and demons, many of which were drawn from the surrounding pagan cultures. These figures were often used in literature to symbolize desolation, chaos, disease, or misfortune. Just as Leviathan could be used as a symbol for the primordial chaos or a powerful enemy nation, Lilith, as a night creature, fits perfectly into this mold. She is a literary device, a symbol of the profound and terrifying godlessness that will overtake Edom, transforming it into a wasteland fit only for demonic spirits. She is not a person from history, but a specter from folklore. This explanation makes perfect sense within the historical context of ancient Israel. The Israelites were engaged in a constant struggle to maintain their unique monotheistic faith, while surrounded by powerful polytheistic empires with rich and seductive mythologies. The authors and compilers of the Hebrew scriptures were exceptionally careful to keep their focus squarely on the sovereignty of Yahweh and his covenant with his people, including competing or extraneous creation stories, especially those involving figures that resembled the demons of their neighbors, would have diluted this central message. It would have introduced a mythological ambiguity that the writers of Genesis were keen to avoid. Over many centuries, as Jewish thought evolved and mysticism flourished, particularly in the Kabbalistic traditions of the Middle Ages, figures like Lilith were drawn out from the folkloric shadows and woven into the narrative. They were used as tools to explore deeper, more complex questions about the nature of good and evil, the cosmic struggle, and the hidden aspects of human nature. But their origins lie in the rich soil of legend, not in the bedrock of the canonical text itself. The page is left unbound. The fact that Lilith is not found in the canonical Bible does not mean her story ceases to exist. On the contrary, her absence from the official record seems to have fueled a powerful and persistent alternative tradition. To find it, we must leave the well-lit study of the biblical scholar and descend into the dusty archives of religious history, where we can gently uncover the fragile, controversial manuscripts that were left unbound from the canon. Here, we find the Alphabet of Ben Sira. This apocryphal work, likely written in the medieval Islamic world around the 8th to 10th century, is where the story of Lilith as we know it is given its fullest expression. The text presents itself as a collection of proverbs and tales told by the wise Ben Sira to the young Babylonian king, Nebuchadnezzar. Within this framework, it tells the story of Lilith in vivid detail. It states plainly that when God created Adam, he saw that it was not good for him to be alone and so created a woman for him from the earth, just as he had created Adam, and called her Lilith. The conflict began immediately. They quarreled over their life together, with Adam demanding she lie beneath him. Lilith, offended, retorted, "Why must I lie beneath you? I also was made from dust, and am therefore your equal." When Adam tried to compel her by force, the text says Lilith, in a rage, uttered the ineffable name of God, sprouted wings, and flew away from the Garden of Eden into the air. The story continues, describing Adam's complaint to God and God's dispatch of the three angels Sinoi, Sansonoi, and Samangaloth to retrieve her. They find her at the Red Sea, a place teeming with the demonic offspring she was now bearing. They deliver God's ultimatum, return, or 100 of your children will die every day. Lilith's refusal is absolute. She accepts the punishment but vows in return to have power over human children, boys for 8 days after birth and girls for 20, unless she sees an amulet bearing the names of the very angels sent to confront her. This text is the primary source, the DNA of the Lilith legend. It fills in the gaps left by the biblical silence with a dramatic and unforgettable narrative of rebellion, exile, and a cosmic bargain. So why was this vivid character and her dramatic tale left out of Genesis? The answer likely lies in the fundamental purpose of the Bible. The book of Genesis is not trying to be a comprehensive history book that documents every single event and person from the beginning of time. It is a work of divine revelation with a highly focused theological agenda to establish the origins of the covenant between God and humanity. The narrative is streamlined to trace this covenant line from Adam and Eve through Noah to Abraham and his descendants. Characters and details that do not serve this central narrative arc are often mentioned only in passing or omitted entirely. We see this with other forgotten figures. Who was Cain's wife? Genesis simply states he went to the land of Nod and knew his wife, with no explanation of her origins. Who, exactly, were the Nephilim, the mysterious sons of God who had children with the daughters of men? The text mentions them in a few enigmatic verses and then moves on. These figures, like Lilith in the later traditions, inhabit the periphery because they are not central to the story of salvation and covenant that Genesis is telling. But in apocryphal texts like the Alphabet of Ben Sira or mystical works like the Zohar, these peripheral figures are brought to center stage. In the Zohar, Lilith is elevated to a cosmic principle of evil, the queen of the demonic realm, the female counterpart to Satan. Her name, which as we know is likely derived from the Hebrew word Lila, night, perfectly encapsulates her role as a figure of darkness, impurity, and chaos. These texts, while not canonical scripture, provide a richer, albeit speculative, picture. They take the silences of the Bible and fill them with stories that challenge us, frighten us, and force us to think more deeply about the consequences of defying God's design. A world before the rain. Let us zoom out for a moment from the specific story of Lilith and consider the broader context of the world in which these events, whether literal or symbolic, are said to have taken place. The pre-flood world described in the early chapters of Genesis is a place of profound mystery, operating under conditions that are alien to our modern experience. Exploring this unique environment may offer deeper insights into why ancient texts speak with such intrigue about figures like Lilith, the Nephilim, or men who lived for nearly a millennium. Genesis describes a time when human lifespans were incredibly long. Adam lived for 930 years, Seth for 912, Methuselah for 969. This suggests a world with a fundamentally different biological or atmospheric environment. Some have theorized about a pre-flood vapor canopy that shielded the Earth from harmful solar radiation, or a stronger geomagnetic field, or simply a genetic purity that had not yet been degraded by millennia of mutation and decay. Whatever the cause, This was a world where time moved differently, where generations overlapped for centuries, and where the memory of creation was still fresh and immediate. It was a world that, while tainted by the first sin, was still much closer to God's original, pristine design. The earth was purer, stronger, and less corrupted by the widespread violence and sin that would eventually precipitate the Great Flood. It is in this context that a rebellion like Lilith's, if it happened as the legends say, would have been all the more stark and shocking. In a world of such profound, lingering harmony, an act of such absolute defiance would not be a small transgression. It would be a foundational crack in the edifice of creation. Her story, whether factual history or a powerful allegory, might reflect a broader truth about this primordial age, that humanity's choices, right from the very beginning, had the power to shape not just personal destiny, but the cosmic order itself. Her flight from Eden would have been a flight from a world of unparalleled vitality and divine proximity into a realm of true, barren otherness. As time progressed from Eden to the flood, the world changed dramatically. Genesis 6 paints a grim picture of this shift. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Sin multiplied. The strange union of the sons of God and the daughters of men produced the mighty Nephilim, and the earth was filled with violence. The divine order established in the garden was progressively disrupted and corrupted by human choices. The long lifespans began to dwindle after the flood. The very fabric of the world was altered. Lilith's story, whether we read it as a myth about a Mesopotamian demon or a legend about Adam's first wife, points toward the inherent fragility of that original perfection. It serves as a powerful symbol of the first seeds of chaos, the first rejection of divine harmony that, when allowed to grow, would eventually lead to a world so corrupt that it had to be washed clean. Her tale is a testament to the power of a single choice to shape destiny and to set a course away from the light, the tapestry of truth. So, after our journey through scripture and myth, through canonical silence and folkloric detail, what have we learned? We have untangled the threads of history, theology, and legend that make up the complex tapestry of Lilith. We have seen her as a Mesopotamian night demon, a medieval feminist icon, a symbol of prideful rebellion, and a cosmic force of evil. So where does the truth lie? The answer, perhaps, is that the story of Lilith, whether rooted in a forgotten historical event or born from the depths of myth, is not meant to provide us with a neat, tidy historical fact. Instead, it challenges us to wrestle with the biggest and most important questions of our existence. What does it truly mean to rebel against God's design? What are the ultimate consequences of pride, of an unyielding refusal to submit our will to a higher, divine purpose? The story of Lilith, in all its forms, is a story of exile. In choosing her own path, she was cut off from the source of life, from the harmony of Eden, from the presence of her Creator. Her freedom was won at the cost of her belonging. This theme echoes throughout the entire biblical narrative. Rebellion against God leads not to true liberation, but to isolation and desolation. The Bible may not give us every detail of the world's first days, but it consistently points to this core truth. All of humanity, from Adam and Eve to us today, shares a common origin in God and a common calling to live in harmony with our Creator. The figure of Lilith, this forgotten or perhaps fabricated woman, serves a powerful purpose as a literary and theological foil. Her story, by its very nature, illuminates the purpose of the stories that were included in the canon. The scriptures focus on God's redemptive plan, a plan that unfolds through a specific lineage and a specific covenant. It is not a sprawling encyclopedia of every spirit, angel, or person who ever existed. Lilith's rebellion, whether real or symbolic, stands in stark, dark contrast to the role of Eve, who, despite her own monumental failure, is called the mother of all living and becomes the vessel through which the seed of redemption, the promised Messiah, will eventually come. Lilith's path of pride is set against the path of faith chosen by countless faithful men and women throughout the scriptures, who found their true strength not in self-assertion, but in obedience. The Bible is not a history, textbook, or a mythological anthology. Its purpose is far greater. It is a divine revelation, a lamp to our feet and a light to our path, guiding us toward truth and relationship with God. The mystery of Lilith, in the end, reminds us that what was left out of the story can sometimes be as instructive as what was put in. Her shadowy existence highlights the brilliant light of the main narrative, God's unwavering, persistent, and loving plan to redeem a fallen humanity and restore the harmony that was lost at the dawn of time. The invitation to faith. So, what is the real, final purpose of Lilith's story? After all the historical analysis and textual criticism, what is its value for us, here and now? It is not about definitively solving an ancient mystery or uncovering every last hidden detail from the dawn of time. The true purpose is to awaken our souls to a timeless and essential truth. Our choices have eternal weight. Rebellion, born of pride, always leads to exile. But God's mercy, for those who will accept it, is always within reach. The story of Lilith, in its dramatic refusal of grace, illuminates the beauty of the alternative, a life of faith. You do not need to know the identity of Cain's wife or the exact nature of the Nephilim to walk in faith. You do not need a definitive biography of Lilith to understand the core message of Scripture. All that is required is a heart that is willing to trust, a spirit that is willing to follow the Creator's design, not because it is forced, but because it recognizes that in His will lies our ultimate peace and purpose. The path of Lilith is the path of the self as the ultimate authority. The path of faith is the path of God as the ultimate authority. The destinations of these two paths could not be more different. One leads to the desolate wilderness by the shores of a dead sea. The other leads back to the garden, and ultimately, to a restored and eternal paradise. As the sun begins to rise on our exploration, casting a hopeful light over the landscape of these ancient mysteries, it symbolizes renewal and clarity. The shadows of Lilith and her story recede, not into irrelevance, but into their proper place as a cautionary tale, a symbol, a question that ultimately points us back to the answer that has been there all along. In the clear pages of Genesis, that we were made for fellowship with God. Now, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this enigmatic figure? Do you see Lilith as a misunderstood hero, a dangerous demoness, a symbolic archetype, or something else entirely? The beauty of these ancient stories is their power to provoke thought and conversation. Let's keep this conversation going. The quest for understanding is a vital part of the journey of faith. Until next time, keep seeking truth, keep asking the hard questions, and above all, keep walking in the light of faith.